Hello and welcome my partners in crime, welcome back to Murder Analysed. Lovely to see you. Before we start, I must say, because I always forget, please hit the subscribe button, the notification bell and anything else you need to do to spread these cases out. I would much appreciate it, so thank you for that. Also, don't forget you can now get on here, Let's Have a Chat About Murder podcast. And some people are confused and said, oh, some of your videos have just got like a screen, you know, with nothing, just a thumbnail. They're podcasts. So I don't know what's happened, but you can get them from Spotify or anywhere else. But they are actually on this channel as well now. So, bit of confusion there. But anyway, I hope it's all, everyone's okay. Now, today's case, right, let's get straight into it really. You've all seen the thumbnail about it, so you sort of know what it's going to be about. You know, this case to me is shocking, right? There's a lot in this case, I think, that isn't fact, could be fact, you know, lots of people, because it's such a strange case anyway, and a disturbing case, and a very, very sad case, I think. So there is a warning out with this case, is that if you know, you don't like cases about children, especially toddlers like this that have been murdered, there's plenty more on here for you to watch. But I think this is an important case for us to look at, but also to discuss, right? So let me know your thoughts on this case. So listen, this is this case of this Precious Doe, right? Now it's called Precious Doe because that's the name that was given to this child when she was found, because she was unidentified for a very long time. And so we have Jane Does and John Does, and they named this child Precious Doe. So that's why she was called that. This case comes as an American case. It's a Missouri case, and it really starts in 2001. So on the 28th of April 2001, a man had gone missing. Right, not relevant to this case at all. An older gentleman, dementia I think he had gone missing. So of course the police were called and put out a search for him. And they had gone round and everywhere and looked for him, but he lived quite close to this Hibbs Park. So of course they thought they'd better check in there. As they were checking around, they got the message come through to say that this gentleman had been found safe and well. Right? So as the officers were walking back out of this park, they noticed something on the ground. And thought, you know, really when they looked at it, I don't think they understood. They thought it could have been what they saw. They thought they saw, but it wasn't that. They sort of walked closer and closer until they realised it was a body of a young toddler. Naked young body of a toddler. And missing her head. She had been decapitated. I mean, you are talking about a 3-year-old, right? So at this point now, the police are thinking, okay, you know, what to do. Everything's now started. And I think they thought this case would be quickly dealt with because the child's identity would be quickly known, because you're talking about a 3-year-old toddler. So the investigation starts, the information goes out, it's put everywhere in this case, right? But when you think about what these police officers were thinking, I would automatically think that if you find a young child alive or dead, right, and they're not old enough to speak, or in this case this girl, you know, was terribly, terribly murdered, someone very shortly would have come forward to say my child's missing or something, wouldn't they? You'd think. But that wasn't the case for this poor girl at all. It just really wasn't. So the police had to name her as a Jane Doe, right? Unidentified. So this is where this Precious Doe comes into it, and I think it's a lovely way actually. And I talk about, don't I, Jane Does and John Does, and how the families feel, you know, when these people go missing and are never found, never identified. So the police at this stage then have tried everything now to find out the identification of this child, because as the days moved on and the weeks moved on and the months moved on, no one had made any report anywhere of a child of that age going missing. So it shocked them, I think, to their core. They felt, you know, sad for this child. One, because of the way that she had been murdered and left. Two, because no one even could be bothered to claim this child. And so it comes to them when the police think, well, if she's not being claimed, obviously family members or something must have had something to do with her disappearance. So it was put out everywhere, this case, but still nothing came back for this child. Nothing at all. So for about 4 years, she was known as Precious Doe. Now, at the time, when they first found this body, they didn't find the head, right? They found the head about 2 days later in a carrier bag, shoved in a bush. And so once they got that head, then they had to then try to identify this child as the months have gone on. And you'll see some photos of what they did to try and get this child to be identified. The head at that point, because this child had probably been dead about 2 days before they found the body, and about 4 days before I found the head. But the body was left open in the wild, clothesless, absolutely naked, this child, right? But the head had been wrapped in a carrier bags and stuff and thrown in this bush. So the head had really started to decompose quite quickly. So the features of the child were there, but they weren't really. When you talk about decomposition, it can be quite fast, especially if it's heat and it's wrapped up like this was, this head. So they went to great pains, to tell you the truth, to do everything they could to show this child as she might have been, to see if anybody would recognise this child and come forward with evidence of who she was, right? The minute they found out who she was, then they could work on what happened to her. But when someone is can't be identified for these sort of reasons, it's very difficult for any investigation, especially when you think that no one, not one person, has come forward to say this child of 3-year-old is missing. Bloody shocking, really, when you think about it. Now, under autopsy, there's a couple of different things wrote about this, right? About this child. One person says that the autopsy shows, I can't, because I'm from the UK, I can't get access to the actual autopsy itself, right? So I have to go on what's being wrote about, and there's different things. Listen, this child died from being severely beaten, right? And we know she was severely beaten because of what the damage to her body was. But also we know what she was beaten with, right? Apart from being kicked and punched and everything else. Found next to the body was the ashtray, a heavy glass ashtray that was used to batter this child to death. And so you think these people, whoever's done this, have put the murder weapon in with the body and probably decapitated her to try and, hide her identity. The clothes were removed. There's two things on this clothes. One, people think it was removed to so that she couldn't be identified by her clothing, right? So they left her totally naked. Other people have said in the autopsy report that she was sexually assaulted, but I'm not sure about that. But what I am sure about is that this child had been so severely beaten, not only with this ashtray, but with fists and with kicking this child, this tiny 3-year-old child, to death, right? We know that. We know that. But I'm not so sure about the assault part of it. I don't like to say it unless I'm sure, and I'm not. I don't know if this is credible, that part of it, so I don't really want to go there with that. But there is still a dead child here who's been decapitated, who's been left, right? No one's claimed this poor kid for bloody years. It's to me, it's one of the most sickening cases, and as you read and as we go through now of what really happened, right, and who bloody done it, I don't know, sometimes I lose my shit on this sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? I know why people don't want to watch this sort of thing. I can understand it, right? This is a heartbreaking case. This is a young child that lost her life to two very, very sick individuals. So of course, let's talk about DNA. So of course the police did try, and don't forget this was 2001, they did try and take DNA and fingerprints and everything from the ashtray, but it had been wiped clean. As I said, her clothes were gone, but her head was left, you know, very decomposed. So all they could do in this case, I think the police, was to do this reconstruction of her face and who she thought, how they could get as closest match to her and put it out everywhere, right? It went to all news medias. This case was massive in trying to find the identity of this child. I mean, really, there was no stone unturned to find the identification and identify this child, but still nothing. No one was talking about this. And you'll see the posters, you know, who am I? You know, don't stay silent. I think there was about $30,000 reward for information on this identity of this child. You know, things were happening for about 4 years. The police really couldn't do any more than they done. Then all of a sudden, though, right, they received a phone call from a man. And he said, I know the killers of this child. I know who she is. And that's when this sort of case broke. So, now the police know the identity of this child and the killers. The whole story, really. But they thought, it was like 3.5, nearly 4 years since this child had been found to this phone call. And you have to think sometimes people say things, right, which are untrue. And I think they were so stunned at this phone call, literally, so stunned. But they thought they had nothing else, right? They have to investigate it. I think at first, no, they didn't believe it. And I think when you hear the story, it's very difficult to believe. And I'll see what you think about it in a minute. But to hold, if someone knew about this crime, and, you know, how did they hold it in for so long? To me, that's terrible, really, that you would know about such a crime, and especially if it was meant to be your family member that done it, meaning that this child was related to you. How did you hold it in? How could you? So this child was finally no longer Precious Doe, right? They had got a name for her. Now, her name was Erica Michelle Marie Green. Now, she was born on the 5th of May, 1997, and she died on the 28th of April, 2021. Now, she was murdered in Kansas City, Missouri, in April. Now, her body was found on the 28th. It's not known if she died there. The police didn't think she died there. They think she had died elsewhere and was brought there. And we'll sort of go over that in a minute. But this story, right? And she was a young African-American girl. And when you see the pictures of her, and I'll put them up, you can see. And see the pictures of the reconstruction of her. You know, for me, these sort of cases really bug me anyway, because these are things, and as we go through this story, you'll see these people should never have even had this child at all. They should never have had her. And any of their children, to tell the truth. And when it comes to this, but listen, this is the story of this young girl, right? Of this Erica Green. This poor child didn't have a chance, right? She didn't have a chance, these people. So now let's go over what really happened, right, to little Erica Green. What really happened. So now let's go over what really happened, shall we? Let's discuss what really happened now with this poor young girl and this. We don't really know the day she was murdered, right, or the day she died from the severe beatings and that she had got. But sometime in April, just before the 28th of April 2001, this child was living with her mother and her stepfather. Now, her stepfather's name was Harrell Johnson. The mother had married him, I think, not very long. She hadn't been married. The woman had already had about 6 or 7 kids with somebody else or other people, right? But in total, there was, I think, 8 children in this household. 8, right? And this Harrell Johnson was stepfather, and the mother was Michelle Johnson, right? Now, these pair had this child. This is the story. How Michelle Johnson told it, the mother, because, you know, she said she didn't kill her, right? But anyway, this is how it starts. So around in April 2001 time, they were in this house living. Now the mother says the child was put to bed. Little Erica was put to bed, but she kept getting out of her bed, right? So she needed to have a little bath and a rest. So Harell, he was the one that then said, put her back to bed. So the mother's saying, when she was in the bath relaxing, right, he was sorting out this child, but he was known, and I think it was stated that on that day, he was out of his head on drink and drugs, right? I don't think this was an abnormal occurrence. I think it was an everyday occurrence in this property for these people. But this child had got out of bed again. Now, she says that he then, while she was in the bath relaxing, he was beating her. He beat her, right? Then she says that he beat her so severely that once she's got out of the bath, she's tried to, like, not revive the child, because she said the child was still alive. She's, you know, she noticed that the child was sort of incapacitated, you know, her eyes rolling back and stuff like this. The kid was dying, right? The kid was dying, but none of these pair give a shit. So she then took the child, took her to the bathroom, splashing water on her face, because I suppose she thought she survived every other beating that she's had. This won't be any different. Well, it was a lot different. Then they thought, well, what are we going to do? You know, this kid's still not dead, right? This kid's laying on the floor now. They haven't even put her in the bed. They've laid her on the floor, struggling to breathe, in and out of consciousness for days. Because you see, these pair have got a criminal background, and there was a warrant out for their arrest. So they couldn't ring the police. They couldn't take the child to the A&E to get any help, because they'd be arrested. So what she's saying is, well, we just left her, you know, for days. This is what she's saying. And then thought, And then she died and we didn't know what to do. So I put her in her stroller. And we took her to this Hibbs Park. We thought, I have to get rid of the body. Right? So they said they stripped her naked because the clothes to may be identified. Then they said, well, then we got a pair of shears. He got a pair of shears and he chopped her head off. So she couldn't be identified. We chucked it in a church bin first. Wrapped it up, chucked it in a church bin. Then we thought, shit, maybe get caught. They may find that and recognise in that church that it's Erica. So the next day they went back and they got the severed head from the bin and chucked it in the bush. And I think the police are, this is why these murders bug me so much, because you have to listen to this bullshit. This child was born in prison by this woman. She was born in prison by this Michelle, her mother. The mother had a criminal record. She was also a street worker. She was also charged, I think, with fraud and different things like that, or counterfeit, I think it was credit cards or whatever it was she was doing. He also had a criminal record and stuff, quite severe one, I think, for assault and different stuff like that, just, general stuff. But you think, though, that you have this child that was born in prison. I think she had been in prison 5 weeks. And then this child was born in prison. So this child's life didn't start off well, right? And I think it was said in prison, because I think she had 4 other children at the time, that she really couldn't cope with that. I think Erica's real father did try to take a lawsuit out on the prison, because he said that the prison should have informed child welfare and all this sort of stuff about her being born and being released and stuff. We have many people in prison, right, who are pregnant and have children. The children have done nothing. So they're not actually under arrest. They're not in the custody of the prisons. So I don't know how far this lawsuit has got. I tried to find it, but it's, again, because I'm in the UK and this is an American thing, it's hard for me to find out. So if any of you know about the lawsuit, let me know. But I don't know. I think, yes, if we have children born in prison and that we have authorities that are saying that she is incapable or was finding it difficult to manage her children, if that was the case, or whether that was the sort of what we would call social services, or children's services may have thought that. Why was nothing really done then, But I don't know if it's the responsibility of the prisons to take care of your children or know who to go to, but I think there should be some system of where these kids are going. Someone should know. You can't just pick up a kid from the prison and say, I'm going to take this kid. And I think this is what's a lot wrong with this system. But as I said, for the prison to, have a lawsuit against it for the cause of her death. No, the cause of her death was this pair, and believe it, this pair of just terrible people that should never have had any children. After this murder, I think Harell, he didn't confess. He said he was not guilty of first-degree murder because he said he didn't have, the intention wasn't there. He didn't go out of his way to kill her. But I think the testimony of his cousin, I think, who had been in the property at times when this child was being beaten, and the severity of these beatings that she had witnessed, showed that there was a constant history of attacks on this child. And at some point, you must understand, no matter if you're on drugs or what, really, that if you are beating a child of 2 or 3 year old, that you are going to damage that child in one way or another, even when it comes down to where they could die from them beatings. And I think that's why he was charged with first-degree murder, because he may not have had the intent as such to do it, but he had a history of beating this child severely in front of people. For one, I think, where she may have urinated over herself, and he didn't like that. We're talking about a 3-year-old, right? She didn't eat the food that he put in front of her, so he beat her and beat her and beat her for that. And you think, okay, right, so there's a testimony that proves that this man did understand what he was doing was wrong. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He continued to do it. But no one reported these people to child services, did they? No one. You've watched a child be beat. You must have, to give evidence, right, to say what this man was doing. Unless they did report it and nothing was done, because we hear that all the time. But in this case, I'm not so sure. I think this child was already in foster care for an early part of her life before she was returned to these people, or this mother. And it's a shame, really. So when the child went missing and was murdered, and it was a few years before the grandfather of the stepfather come forward, this Harrell Johnson come forward, he was, how can I put it, right, so we have now the grandfather knowing that this child 3.5, 4 years ago was murdered, even though these people had tried to tell everybody that she had gone back to the foster parent to be permanently brought up by them for her own good, right? It's better for her. So because this child had already been in some form of care before, people believed them, right? They believed them that that's where she was. They could understand it, really. And I tell you, I think some people must have felt relief that that's what's happened, if that was true. But of course it wasn't true, was it? So we've had this grandfather now ringing up the police. This strange phone call, telling them who the child was, what happened to the child. And they brought these pair in for questioning. But again, I think, right, I'm a grandmother. I know many of you are, right? Grandparents, you know, mothers, fathers, grandparents, uncles, aunties, all this sort of stuff. If you knew that such a horrific crime had took place to one of your grandchildren, one of your family members, could you hold it in for 3.5 years? Right? Because he questioned this man very early on, the grandfather, questioned his grandson and said, what's happened? You've done something. The man told him everything all them years ago. He told him. So you've held this in. I mean, all right, he's come forward now, 3 or 4 years later. The child was identified and everything. Okay. But I think he done it. And I think he says he didn't want to go to his grave with that on his mind. Well, I don't know, you've lived, mate, with yourself for 3.5, 4 years with that on your mind. I couldn't. I couldn't. I suppose we have to be grateful, I suppose, in some way, because a lot of people would never have come forward. You know, I think, to me, I know I go on about this, and but it's important to understand, right, the mentality of these people that's having these children, bringing up these children, killing these bloody children, right, and the family members around them really don't give a shit, because you couldn't have, if you've held back for all these years, that information. You know, I just don't get it. I don't get it. And I will never apologise for not getting it, right? I just won't. If someone tells you that they've done a crime like that, against a child like that, I don't give a shit who they are. You should have rung the police straight away, right? Because what right has that man got to live his life? And you have other children in this property, other children in this family that were at risk by leaving that man out there. This drunk, this person that was addicted to drugs, right? That could do this to a child. You've left them in the care of other children. Bloody shocking. Right, so now let's go into the horrible bit, right? Because we have to say it. In 2005, when this was, I think it's 3rd of December 2005, prosecutors announced that they had sort of this Harrell Johnson, and that he had denied it and everything else, right? But had admitted it, but denied murder. You want to get off on a manslaughter one. There's always been the question though, was little Erica dead when he used the shears to cut off her head, right? I think, I don't think the police believe she was. She was dying, right? And I think this is why they've given the date as the 28th of April when she died, 2001. Because they believe she was still alive, or in and out of a coma, this sort of thing. But she was still breathing, she was still alive. They're saying when the head was decapitated with a pair of shears. That's what they believe. There's a lot of people that believe that. Because this girl had been left on the floor, unconscious, for days by this pair. So that's what the police believe. So he severed her head after, they're saying, he had brutally beaten her. Now this LaWanda Driscoll, this is the cousin, said that Eric's mother helped him, Erica's mother helped him dispose of this body by putting him in the stroller. But they're saying they don't know if the child was already dead, right, or dying. So the thought is terrible, isn't it? That if this child, one, would have been taken to a hospital early, the doctors were saying that yes, she would have survived it, right? I don't know what condition she would have survived it in, but she would have survived. If they had immediately called, you know, emergency services when he had done this attack. But they didn't. So that makes it even worse. This child then suffered for days. Terrible. It should have been terrible pain, terrible suffering of this child. And then to know, not to know whether the child was decapitated, alive or dead. And I think this is what makes this case, for me, one of the most shocking cases. It really is shocking. To think, you know, it breaks my heart, right, for these sort of murders. But what annoys me is that this child was placed in the care of this woman, even though they knew that she wasn't capable, with her other, you know, children said were not, she wasn't doing well, right? She had a history of in and out of prison. He had a history of in and out of prison. There was a history of drugs. There was a history of drink. This child never had a bloody chance, right? And no one sort of stepped in. Not the family members even didn't give a shit, right? When this kid was being beaten, they didn't give a shit when they knew, this grandfather knew that this kid was murdered and decapitated in such a way. I mean, it's all right coming down the line because you want to feel, you know, relief before you meet your maker, that you need to do the right thing. You know, you should have done the right thing when the child was first murdered. That's when it should have happened. And this, what annoys me about this case, and this is what makes this case so disturbing. All them different factors within this case are a bloody disgrace, really, when you think this is what we call human beings, this is what we call society. What the bloody hell is going on when this sort of thing is allowed to continue to happen? And when we think it's all right to withhold evidence, to withhold things that would get this person or these people very clearly off the streets where they needed to be off the streets in prison for a very long time. But you've left them out on the streets. You've left them in our community. You've left them in the home with other children, knowing what they were. For me, that's terrible. That is just shocking to me. So you have a lot of people praising the grandfather. No, I'm sorry. No. I'd have praised you if you'd come forward and said there and then. Absolutely. I've got no praise for anyone that withholds any information on a crime like that for that long. Especially when it's your own flesh and blood that's been murdered in such a way. I've got absolutely no respect for these people at all. Any of them. Tonight we finally get some sentence in here. As I said, this Harrell Johnson pleaded not guilty, but in the end pleaded guilty, but not to the first degree, but he got first degree murder charge anyway, and he was convicted of that, and he was sentenced, I think, to life without parole. I think they did go for the death penalty with him. I'm not sure if they got it. I don't think they did. I think he just got life in prison, right? On the 22nd of October 2008, this Michelle Johnson, the mother, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison for her exchange of information in 2007, and a guilty plea was done then with her for second degree murder because of her testimony against her husband, right? The killer. But for me, 25 years, this woman who clearly played an active part in this murder, right? Because as I said, we don't really know whether the child was dead when they removed her from the house or not, right? So she helped dispose of the body. Not did she just dispose of the body, she told that she'd put the head in a bag. She said that they dumped it in the church but it was going to get found, so they worried about that, and they went back and they removed the head. I mean, 25 years. It's a bloody joke. Even for American law, I'm bloody shocked. But these plea deals, they didn't need to give her a plea deal to prosecute this man and get a conviction for this man for that murder, right? That was unnecessary. This woman should be really spending the rest of her life in prison because she's as bad as him. You've got her story against him. Alright, so he done the beating, but you sat there and watched it. To me, no. I'd like to know what you think on this. Whether you think she deserves longer time, I just don't know what to ask you about this case because it's so bloody shocking, isn't it, really, when you think about it? And it rolls me right up, these cases. When we look at this young girl, right, her life, right from the beginning, was not good. And her death was horrific. Right, this poor child. You see her, you know, and I've tried to do my best with my photos to bring her back, you know, to what we should be remembering in her life, this beautiful child that was definitely taken away. I mean, she would have been in her 20s now. Yeah, she would have been in her 20s. Just shocking. Anyway, this lawsuit blames Oklahoma officials for Precious Doe's murder, and that. So, if any of you know about that, let me know, because I'm not really sure about that. I can't find it, right? So, but I'd like to also know your thoughts, because we have a lot of people that have children in prison. Should it be the prison's responsibility to take care of these children as well? Right, they do take care of them, right, in that way. But I'm talking about parental responsibility. This is what they're saying. That should they inform? What this is process? I'm not really sure here in America on that. The process of getting these kids to, to know where they're going, what's happening to them once they're taken away from the mother and put out into the, society. And I think this is what they're saying. Also, I don't really know much about the actual father of Erica Green. I don't really know much about that. But where was he? I know he's brought these things, but he must have known his child was born, and stuff. So is there responsibility to families, for the family, and what sort of responsibility do you actually believe that a prison should have? You know, the children that were born there haven't done anything wrong. So that in one way, they are right in what they're saying. They don't have any legal rights over that child. They're not the ones incarcerated. It's the mothers. It's very strange, isn't it, when you think about it? I've never really thought about it before. Anyway, let's have a little discussion on that. I might have a more read up on that. So there was the lawsuit one. What do you think of the grandfather? Do you think he's great? Do you think he's done the right thing? Should he have done it earlier? All these sort of questions that I have go through in my mind with this. Yeah, it's a shocking case, this, right? It really is. And I'd like to know if anyone knows anything more about this case, whether this, I know that she was under social services or child protection, this child. But did they do anything? Was there connections to them then? Because I know they'd moved from different cities. So she was, I think, had been raised in Oklahoma by another woman before her mother took her to Kansas City. So you had someone else looking after this child who was meant to be really, really good with this child, and has spent most of this child has spent most of her life with this woman, to then be given then back to the mother. I think, so they'd moved from Oklahoma to Kansas City, right? And this is is it because they've moved state? What is it? And why, though, would you take a child back if you don't want it? If you can't look after it? If you haven't got the motherly instincts? If you want to drink and take drugs all day or go to prison and do all the things you do? Why would you want a child? Why would you want them? Especially 8 of them this woman had. But in the end, to kill a child like that, to discard of her like she was rubbish, your own mother, it's, to me, that's the worst thing, right? The worst thing is this child, usually its mother is where they go for safety and protection and stuff. This child never had any of it. She never had any of that at all. Any of it. So this has been the little Erica Green case. This beautiful Precious Doe case. Shocking case, I know, right? Twisted in its way of it is, because it's such a strange case anyway, to have a child that's unidentified for so long. But I'd like to know your thoughts on it. So thank you for joining me, and until the next time, bye bye.